gracias por su presencia. El día de hoy tenemos el gran honor de tener un invitado de lujo que ha sido invitado por la Asociación Psicoanalítica Mexicana y la Universidad de las Américas. Yo creo que es importante que ustedes sepan que nosotros tenemos un convenio de colaboración con la Asociación Psicoanalítica Mexicana, que es una de las asociaciones más importantes en el estudio de psicoanálisis de México. Supongo que han escuchado hablar de esta asociación. Tenemos desde hace tiempo un convenio con ellos para las maestrías, el doctorado, y el día de hoy, como parte de este convenio de colaboración que tenemos, hemos invitado al doctor Martin Theising, que como ustedes saben, psicoanalista, director de la Universidad de Berlín. Para aquellos que hablen alemán, podrán hacer preguntas en alemán, y si no, pues en inglés. La conferencia va a ser en inglés, ustedes son bilingües, entonces por favor no nos dejen mal. Espero que lo entiendan muy bien y muchas gracias por su presencia. Les voy a pedir un fuerte aplauso para el doctor.
Yes, dear Dr. Domingo, Dr. Axelrod, I'm very thankful being here for your invitation, that I can get to learn Mexican students, how they are and how they think, and I'm very curious to get your ideas about your psychology, and as I learned you to study psychology with a psychoanalytic approach, or some kinds of your studies are psychoanalytical, and I come from a university in Berlin. It's called International Psychoanalytic University Berlin, and of course we are looking for international students, so maybe if some of you are interested to do parts of their study in Berlin, maybe there are some ways. And if you are interested after the lecture, and if there is some time, I could give you a short presentation about our institution if you are interested in this. But at first I will speak. The lecture is, as you know, about aging. And the title is Aging, Dependence and its Recognition, a Lifelong Developmental Task. If I usually ask students, would you like to become old? Would you like to become an old man, an old woman? I heard no. Yes? No, yes? Maybe? Or sometimes I hear, yes, but. What is the but? I hear, I want to become old, but I don't want to become dependent. This is a fantasy or an idea which is associated with aging very close, and which many people do fear, especially in Western societies. They have the idea of autonomy and not being dependent. And as you will hear, I try to make this a little bit relative. For aging means living. And living means being dependent and at the same time striving for independence, and the struggle to accept the fact of remaining dependent belonging to the human condition. As a researcher in the field of psychoanalysis and aging, my special research interests are in suicide and aging. I'm especially interested in the phenomena of dependence which appears in old age. What is it and what does it mean? At the beginning, I will speak about dependence as an essential part of the human condition. The next paragraph is about transience and dependence, before turning to phenomena of dependence in old age. And I will give you a case example of a psychoanalytic treatment. The newborn child is obviously and existentially dependent on the care provided by fellow humans in the most basic activities of daily living. These experiences with the other in this situation are inextricably linked to the situation of sensory stimuli, to smell, the experience of skin contact, listening to the voice, and in this way being amalgamated with feelings that want to be experienced again. A desire for the object is created. You can say the drive is born. In fact, our inner world does not exist without objects, without the memory of them, without their representation. External losses generate a tension between the memory of the object and its absence in the outer world. A longing arises for what is still there inside, what is remembered. When you have a good experience and you want to repeat it and you feel there is something missing outside, then there is a desire to come into the same situation. Going back to the developmental perspective, intrauterine and then no breath experiences. This is a term, a psychoanalytic term. I don't know if you are familiar with this. No breath experiences is a symbolic term. This means the baby needs the breast very urgently, and the experience it's not there. This is a very important thing. And if you take it symbolically, we always in all our life we have no breast experiences. Yeah? There is something missing. This is meant by this term. Already intrauterine, these experiences communicate a preconception of the loss of the object. This refers to the experience that the mother, or later the natural environment upon which our existence depends, is not always and forever available. We face the knowledge of our transience with the wonderful ability to mentally represent objects which are not present, including those already past, and to remember them, or more precisely, actually to bring them out from the inside onto the scene. The intrapsychic representations remain independent of time. With this capability, and also the ability of the representation derived from it to remain present in the other, we can live with the knowledge of own mortality.
Continue.
Okay.
And as long as they come projected.
Okay. Maybe I repeat the last idea, for this is a central one. The idea is that we know as human beings, and probably no animals do, we know about our own mortality. And this is a very hard burden. And to live with this is only possible when because we can represent what we feel, what we experience in our relationships. It's in our mind. And so if we are not in contact with other persons, we can't remember it. And this is a very important thing. This is the idea. Understandable?
It is clear, yes.
Okay. I think maybe your students know or understand more as you suppose.
Yeah.
Seems to be at the
I
moment.
do. Yes. I'm very pleased with that.
Okay. And you were projected in Spanish?
It's fine.
Okay, fine. So I can wait a minute.
And do you think what's talking about immortality towards young people?
What I think when I talk about mortality,
With young people?
yes, my intention is to make them to make them aware of the mortality, of their own transience. For I think this is important to live. It's an important basic. If we are aware of this, how to live, and that we have to live now, and that it is not eternal. I think in young age we are not so aware of our own our own mortality and so on. Yeah? We live as if we would live forever. And this is an error.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
Yes, I can think in that.
Yeah.
I think I am immortal.
Okay. And there is a famous writer, his name is Elias Canetti. He wrote, I think it is possible that we really live from the dead. I dare not to think what we would be without them. This is Elias Canetti. And I know that I'm in a country where the relationship to the dead is a special thing in your culture. I heard about the Day of Death, and then I learned that this is of Celtic origins. But this Day of Death, how you celebrate it in your country, is for us very strange. But it is a sign that the dead people are living in us, and then you bring it to the outside in these ceremonies. This is interesting. Let me see. The constant attempt to turn experiences which are passively undergone, such as this knowledge, for example, into action, is described by Sigmund Freud with the well-known gun there game. Did you find the passage now? Yeah, okay, this is where we are now. I will explain this game. He watches his 18-month-old grandson throwing away a spool of thread again and again, then pulling it back on the court while saying, "Gone," and there. With this game, he transforms, this is the interpretation of Freud, the baby, transforms passive suffering, namely the parting from the mother, which is experienced as a loss, parting from the mother, which is unavoidable sometimes, into an active throwing away. Then it's not the mother who is throwing away the baby, but it's the baby who throws away not the mother, but the spool. It also opens up the possibility of his being able to pick up the discarded again himself. In such a way, in their play, and this is quote Freud, in their play, children repeat everything that has made a great impression on them in real life. And in doing so, they apprehend the strength of the impression and, as one might put it, makes themselves master of the situation. So I'm not dependent, but I'm active, I'm the active master. This is what the baby does with this play. This is very interesting. And I quote this play here, for I think that's what we are doing, trying to do all our life. Many of our efforts in daily life are to be independent, to be autonomous, to be the master of the situation, but at the same time we stay dependent, dependent on others, and so on. This is what I'm going on. This is the central idea. In this game, the child already anticipates the experience of the return of the absent mother to whom it is addicted. Before it can do that, it has to have the experience that the absent mother returns. In this play, there is the experience already, mother comes back. This is the second part of the game. Psychoanalysts think that before this experience, existentially disastrous fears of abandonment are triggered by the absence of the object, for it is not initially sure that the mother will return. If this has not the experience in the first times, it's not sure enough. And for example, in our country, this is not in the text now. For example, in our country, there is a discussion, when is a child sure enough to be given to a caretaker? How long has he or she to have the experience that mother comes back and that he is safe and secure and then he can turn to another caretaker. Or if this done is too early, can this have traumatic traces? This is a big discussion. And only through the repeated and that often enough repeated experience of her return does it become dependable. Can the child believe in it and her departure become bearable? And another addition, it's not in the text, in many cases in clinical psychology later, you will meet on patients who are not sure or who don't have this inner memory that they can be sure that the other is still alive. That there are catastrophic fears in them that the other is going lost. And one kind to try with is very often to be seen, I don't depend on them, I'm very independent. And this can be held till people become very old and they are in a bodily dependency. I come back to this. The second chapter is transience and dependence. A conception of time and transience is made possible by the presence of another. This is interesting. How is the concept of time developed? And this is developed in a relationship by the presence of another. Their disappearance, their reappearance, and their final disappearance. With final disappearance is meant their death. The experience of time is a prerequisite for the perception of constancy and change and development in subject and object. A remark to this, when in psychoanalysis we speak about object, this is sometimes, this seems to be very technical, that we make a thing out of a person or something like this. But with object is really meant that it is the inner image of the other which everybody of us produces. This is the object, not the real person. The object is the one we imagine of the other. It is only with this perception that an idea of age in time can be formed. Time is a precondition for aging, yeah? Otherwise there is no aging. We are aware of our own mortality and the transience of real objects, and we also have the wonderful ability to mentally represent objects which are not present. The intrapsychic representations exist independently of time. With this ability, and perhaps only with it, we can live with the knowledge of transience. We have learned, wrote Freud, the unconscious mental processes are in themselves timeless. This means, in the first place, that they are not ordered temporarily, that time does not change them in any way, and that the idea of time cannot be applied to them. Ego functions underlie the perception of time and transience and of our dependence on time, interacting with timeless unconscious processes. However, even the unconscious is not completely timeless, as Thome has shown. He interprets Freud's conceptualization of the timelessness of the unconscious as a narcissistic phenomenon. It is probably our fantasy of immortality that recurs in the supposed timelessness of the unconscious and in the nirvana principle. Now I'm missing a page. Everyone knows their ultimate dependency, their own mortality, and yet they also unconsciously accept the contrary. In one patient who had witnessed the fatal accident of his partner, it was a man and his wife was dying by a car accident, it appeared in the analysis that the terrible experience had unconsciously confirmed to him that others die, but he himself escapes death. This is very interesting. Yeah? We know about dying, and at the same time we suppose that's not we ourselves. And when somebody dies, this is proved. Freud recalls, quote, the remark attributed to a husband, the husband says to his wife, if one of us dies, I shall move to Paris. Such cynical jokes would not be possible if they did not have an unevolved truth to reveal, which we cannot admit when it is boldly and seriously stated. It has well known that one may even speak the truth in jest. End of quote. Namely, the truth is that we cannot rightly imagine our own mortality. That we cannot imagine, we know, this is one thing, knowing cognitively, but really realize, imagine, accept, we do not, it's my thesis. This is probably an essential condition of human existence. We need psychological ways of operating which have the quality of denial, of narcissism, if we are to be able to live with the knowledge of our own mortality. In narcissism, we protect ourselves from the painful experience of dependence. An additional remark, here you see that narcissistic things are not only pathological, but this is very normal and we need it sometimes for normal life. Maybe you will have a lecture about defense mechanisms, for example, and then you see how necessary these things are. The narcissistic defensive position is marked by a search for a quality of experience with which the feelings of helplessness and despair caused by separation or injury can be overridden. Narcissistic fantasies make it possible to regain control over a situation that threatens to spiral out of control. Consciousness of time, on the other hand, requires giving up omnipotent thinking. And this is maybe the question I was asked, why do I do this lecture here, was your question. And I think that consciousness of time, which we are trying to make clear, on the other hand, requires giving up omnipotent thinking, requires recognizing the historical dimension of one's own life. To develop the sense of time, it is necessary to integrate past, present and future. The consciousness of temporality, defended against in so many ways, penetrates into consciousness more and more with age. An expression of this is the sense of time passing more quickly. Maybe you know your grandmother says this. The time passes by so quickly. And you remember when you were a small child waiting for Christmas Eve, time was so long. Yeah? And this changes the experience of time during your life experience. Age confronts us with the fact that postponement into the future, and this is the next lecture for you, to postpone in future, is only realistic to an increasingly limited extent. So what you want to do it today. The reality of old age compels us, according to Roy Schäfer, to give up the fantasies of immortal objects and the hunt for an ideal object. It's another interesting idea. We are hunting for the ideal object. I think many of us, but especially of you, I'm an old man, I have to give up the idea that I found the ideal object. But and this comes with age, yeah, that we have to realize that ideal things are other things than realistic things. Manic and narcissistic defense mechanisms through which dependence and neediness are so controlled and prevented that human objects become unimportant, lose strength in more mature adults and are replaced in successful aging by a growing acceptance. As an 85-year-old patient put it, he said, it is necessary to develop a second submission, by which he meant submission to the authority of the body. Submission is accompanied by the recognition of generational differences of loss and death. The first experience of time in the course of life is an experience of dependency, as a postponement of gratification. I cannot get it at once, but a moment later. I remember very well, this is an addition here, I remember very well one of my little girls one time, she asked, may I have an ice cream, but not we'll see. This means this we'll see was the answer she has got from her parents very often. When she had desire for something, an ice cream or whatever she wants, parents say, okay, we'll see, maybe. And she said, I want an ice cream and not we'll see. This was no postponement. This was her experience, and she could not suffer this in this moment. And this is what Küchenhoff says, this is the first experience of the child of time. There is a time, but I cannot bear the time in this experience. It is therefore the result, the experience of time, is the result of the relationship to others. The experience of time is required for the perception of constancy and change in subject and object. Only with this concept can the idea of a history and of aging over time be formed and the subject become historical. Do you know when, this is another remark, do you know when a child has the idea of a historical being? In which age does a child have the idea, I am the one who was another one last year and will be another one next year or so? This idea over time, when children can tell a story about themselves. When I was younger, I behaved in such a way, and now I'm more mature and I do other things. This is about around age, around 8. 8 years old children begin to have an idea of their own historical existence. The consciousness of time is structured according to what is past, present, and future. This is the last sentence here. And to make this clear, some of you have probably some clinical experience. If you think of clinical experience of very bad, very severe depressive patients, you see there's a breakdown of this time structure. This is one of the phenomena of depression. Depression is eternal presence. Things will never change. It will never become better. There is no future. And there is no access to the past. There were good times, and I can remember, and I can rely on my relatives and so. So there's no access to the past, and there will be no future. There is eternal presence. This is depression. One phenomenon of depression. Now I come to the main chapter, Dependencia en la vejez. Dependence in old age. Okay. With older people, personal skills and important functions which nourish the sense of self-esteem are devalued by renewable generations with accelerating speed in a rapidly moving world. If you think about your parents, about your grandparents, if you have great-grandparents, how familiar are they with the digital technology or not? This begins with a certain age. Of course there are differences, and meanwhile old people like me are somewhere familiar, but In our institute, if there is something wrong with the computers or so, there is the question is here a 12-year-old? So, to help us, for example. It shows how the things changes. And what does this mean for the elderly people? In past times, this was other. When there was a problem, a technical problem, you were looking for an old master, who has the knowledge. And this is a great challenge, I think, to our world today. A normally developed narcissism, or a normally developed self-esteem, you can say, with adequately internalized object representations and appropriately formed object they can forego constantly new narcissistic confirmation, and usually allows the signs of aging and its losses to be experienced and sufficiently mourned. Mourning is one of the main tasks of aging, without excessive denial and without a sense of devastating anxiety. The elderly can then identify with the younger ones who have their future ahead with their greater capacities and their development. However, if the aging person remains entirely dependent on ever new external recognition, which internally, some people, for example, go to give lectures to have external recognition. Even when they are old, they have it necessary, like me. Which internally leaves few traces, strong feelings of envy and jealousy towards the younger generation can be activated when the external recognition fails to materialize. The developmental challenge for aging people, based on the work of mourning, to make way for the younger generation, or the failure of this challenge, is a theme in different fairy tales. Perhaps for me the most well-known being Snow White, who is envied by her stepmother for her youthful beauty and pursued with deadly hatred. You see, this is a developmental task for elderly people to accept that the younger ones are the more beautiful, the more successful, the more effective, or what else. And that sometimes, in many aspects, for example, in your professional life, you will have to suffer from this, that there are elderly people who feel in danger of your younger potency, for example. And this has to be dealt between the generations, generational task. Back to the text. Consciously experienced dependence and independence in old age depend primarily on the condition of the body, and in particular on whether bodily functions continue to be controlled. The ability to think is also based on bodily functions remaining intact. If somebody is becoming has dementia, for example, it has to be clear this is a bodily process in the brain. So even there the body is present. Of course, there are other reasons to forget something. Sometimes it is a very good defense mechanism that you don't remember, but this is not dementia. And the body, in age, the body becomes the organizer of the psyche, as Holst writes, following René Spitz. I don't know, maybe you know the developmental theory by René Spitz. He talks about organizers of the psyche. And so you can say the organizer of the psyche in very old age is the body. The body defines well-being, and by often requiring care shapes the new interpersonal relationships which have to be formed. In these qualities of experience, in caring relationships in early childhood can be reactivated if help from other people becomes necessary for food intake, locomotion, bodily excretions or hygiene, for thinking and the orientation which depends on this, and for communication. The self proves to be relatively resistant to aging processes. So self means the image which you have of yourself. It stubbornly and for a long time refuses to integrate physical changes into the body self. A commonly used strategy for dealing with the aging body consists in splitting the aging or ill body from the self. Why can I not send my eyes, my knees and my heart to the doctor and stay quietly at home, without pain, and enjoy the remainder of life? Wondered an older patient. I have to look to the watch, I think.
15 minutes, doctor?
15 minutes.
15.
15, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you can read all the text. I will skip
We're
it.
reading.
You can read.
Oh, yeah.
I will spring to the case exam
Okay.
for the last 15 minutes. So, oh no, one. Maybe there's one. I have one important idea which I want to read. I skip a part and I spring to dependence on care is the most feared potential characteristic of older age, as if one wanted never again to be dependent on another person for personal care. I don't know if you can find it.
Is that that one?
No,
The patient what?
no, before, about 1 page before, 2 pages before.
Okay, good.
Dependence on care is the beginning of a paragraph.
Care.
It's the most feared potential characteristic of older age.
I see? Okay.
Okay, here we are, yeah. Dependence on care is the most feared potential characteristic of older age. As if one, and this is interesting, I taught for a long time nurse students, and I asked them the same question. Do you want to become old? They said yes, but not dependent. I said, what is so terrible in the nursing? You are studying. And this is, I think this is the thing. We never want to be dependent on another person for personal care, as if one held terrible memories of the constellation from early childhood. Being dependent on care means dependent on the actual presence of another who can determine their own presence and absence, to be reliant on them and to have to recognize their importance. It is not the latest slide, which in itself is minimal, but the smallest slide of the present moment has aroused and set working the memories of very many more intense earlier slides, behind all of which there lies an addition to memory of a serious slide in childhood which has never been overcome. This is Freud. There are diseases, oh no, I skipped this sentence, this paragraph 2, and the next one. I go to the case example. Sorry, I have too much material and
Don't worry, it's quite clear.
yes, okay.
Is that the case?
Yes, yeah, case illustration. Before I talk about this case, I will say you another idea. We talked about the dependency which is essential for human relations. This is especially seen in the mother-infant relationship. Yeah, this is clear. And in old age, when you become older, one day maybe you have to care for your parents. There's a shift, a generational shift. And I think this is I want to remember you that this is a special human thing. In the world of the animals, when the animals are grown up, they don't know their parents any longer. They live for themselves. In the human culture, we are, on one hand, we have to develop independence of our parents and adolescents, and on the same time, we stay related to them. We stay attached to our parents. And in very old age, the parents are more or less dependent on the younger generation. We call it in our country the generational contract. This means that that mostly people in their 50s and 60s have to care for their old parents. And in this world of individualization for social psychology, individualization in many things we become independent of. For example, in religious questions, we should decide ourselves, or in partner questions, not our parents should decide. And if you take this in account, then the development is that my mother, when she is very old and dependent, I would say to her, "Oh mother, you cared for me your whole life. Now you are old and ill, and now you are lucky you can care for yourself." Yeah, this is very provocative, but this would be the individualization very consequently. That the elderly should care for themselves individually and not being cared for by others. But I want to make you aware that this is, on one hand, this would be the consequence of a total individualization process. And for example, in our country we have a very good pension social system, but since 10 or 20 years the government tells us, you should not be trust on this system, you should care for yourself additional, for your children will not care for you when you are old. The children in the form of pension funds, for example. Yeah, this is an interesting development of individualization, but at the same time, this is not very official, but at the same time we are very related to our old, to our parents and grandparents, of course. And for example, in Germany, more than 80% of the nursing of elderly people is done in family conditions by their children and grandchildren, and so this relationship keeps on. But there is a change, and it is a developmental task for people in their 50s and 60s to take over responsibility. For example, we call it filiale Reife, the majority, filial majority, the majority of the daughter. Majority of the daughter and the sons, to be able to do this and not longer to, sometimes the elders, the 60-year-olds are longing for something, for the ideal object to get from their parents. And this hope is over then. This is not possible. They are the ones who have to care for it. Okay, this I wanted to add. And now the case, how these things I was speaking about very generally now. But in a psychoanalysis, we work, this is, I think, a special thing of psychoanalysis, that we work in a microscopic way. What is happening in this situation, in this minute, in this second even, we try to be very aware, and how can we see these things? And I will give one example, I think this illustrates it. The patient I would like to speak about was born in 1941. So he is today
75?
Thank you very much. No. And this case example is about 5 years old. So he was beginning 70. Okay. He was conceived during his father's leave from the front. This was in times when there was the Second World War. Yeah. He was received by his mother when his father had a holiday from front. And grew up in the first few years alone with his mother. At the age of 67, he had come into analysis, and the example is then from the 70s, with the feeling that he had not really lived already. 67, it's a feeling life is going to the third part, and I did not live really. His now 23-year-old son had just left home and had not carried on the family business that the patient had taken over from his father. He was motivated by the question of how he should say farewell to his farm. Here is maybe there's a mistake in translation, for I wrote farm, I meant firm. So it's not a farm. It's a business, the firm of his father. Yeah. The son did not take over the firm.
But
This is also a fantasy of many businessmen, yes, that the firm is taken over by their sons, and then it is a kind of eternity. Eternity, and the sons say, no, I'm not interested, or something like this. This was very hard for this man in this case, for he had taken the firm from his father and wanted to give it to his son, and he refused. Giving up the business would require a change of residence also. Earlier in the analysis, on saying farewell, at the end of the hour, and now it becomes microscopic, he almost always had the impression, at the end of every hour, that the time had passed too quickly and we had not even got down to business. He felt pushed from the couch every time. You can say this is experience of time like children have it, in a regressive state in analysis. Session is already over. He felt as if he had been driven out of the immortality of a paradise into which he had entered with infinite hopes. This is coming to analysis with great hopes, and now he is pushed away. Expectations that were newly raised at the beginning of every session, and disillusions that reoccurred at the end of every session. So this question is happening every day. This morning, he begins one session. I was driving towards the rising sun, and I wondered whether you, perhaps, could see also the sunrise. This was his opening remark. After a pause, he reported a dream. I'm lying in a room and must really keep my eyes closed. I may not look, but I blink. Then, as a penalty, I have to clear away a huge heap of rubble in which a piece of gold is buried. It is a pile of rubble, it's a pile of rubble like on the 11th of September. It really is a work of torture. I don't know how old you are and how clear it is what it means. The rubble of 11th of September, the destroyed Twin Towers. This is its picture. My initial understanding of the situation and the dream is something like this. The sun rising is to join us. Here's the idea, we see it together. While he is busy with the setting sun, which signals farewell. Separation was not only the theme of the last session, but is, as mentioned, also a central theme of his everyday life. The demands posed by these farewells trigger in the patient the fear of a huge pile of rubble. His conflict is that he both wants to see and to close his eyes, and as a compromise, he blinks. Wanting to see clearly, which we strive for in analysis, can be painful, but might also bring a piece of gold into a light of day. During my thoughts, these were my thoughts, which I have not yet communicated to him, he talks about his feeling of being tortured. It occurs to him that he has indeed been trying to escape such a painful feeling in the last week. He is alluding to the fact that he had asked me if I could describe him sleeping pills. And he says, it was really outrageous, says the patient, that I asked you as an analyst for sleeping pills. Pause. Maybe, his association, I should be punished for it with torture labor. He does some self-analysis. As a boy, I once threw a stone at my father. I do not know if I hit him or not. In any case, I immediately shouted, I didn't do it. This is a memory. I had not thought any more of the desire, now it's a report about me. I had not thought any more of the desire for sleeping pills. He wants something from me which is refused, whereupon he gets angry, which he may allow in the form of remembering the stone's throwing, and it has to be left open whether he also struck probably me. This is an interesting thing in psychoanalysis. We look how is the way of association, which idea follows to which idea, and try to combine it. He returns later to his desire for a prescription for sleeping pills. It occurs to him that he took sleeping pills for the first time when he was forced as a 19-year-old to take over the business after his father's death. The business which he is now faced with giving up. I remember, he said, how I sat at the bed and had to keep holding out the pee bottle to him, to my father. It was a question whether he could in fact still urinate, something on which his survival depended. He makes a pause. Or he had a renal disease of his renal, how do you say, his kidneys. Yeah, Brilliones disease. Among the papers, the next idea of the patient is, among the papers which the lawyer prepared for us at the weekend was a living will, but it lacked a provision for assisted suicide, that someone is committed to helping me if I no longer want to live. And I answer, I say, you are wondering if in an emergency I would be able, for example with sleeping pills, if you can count on my commitment and have me available. 5 minutes before this end of the session, the patient asked about the remaining time. This is an expression we use, remaining time. He uses this term in an allusion to its political context. And I have to explain it, for this is in the text not completely clear. I don't know what is translated. But remaining time is used in our country for nuclear plants. You know, the Restlaufzeit is a German term. The time, how long a nuclear plant will run. For maybe you know there was a political decision after Fukushima to shut up all the nuclear plants, for it's too dangerous. And every nuclear plant, the factory owners want to run them longer, and they have got 5 years, 10 years or so. And this is in the political discussion, remaining time. And the patient uses this term for his situation. How long is my remaining time in this session now on the couch? And he touches on the parting, but also creates a new connection by this, because he can be sure that I will enjoy his wordplay. To use this term, remaining play, I think it's very ambivalent, but it's a creative process to use this term in this context, I think. And he knows that or he seems to know that I like it that there are remaining times for nuclear plants, for example. All this is in these words. Yeah? He is perhaps beginning to bid farewell to the desire for a timeless, available, and thus paradisal object which requires mourning, but wants to keep the decision about the end in his own hands. So he is controlling the time. He says, how long is the time? The painful fact of the limited time of the departure is pictorially represented in this session by the patient's memory of the end of life of the father. Does he still pee? Is he still flowing? In this treatment, the feeling arises in me again and again that the communications and associations of the patient can only ever be received and worked with in an inadequate and very restricted way. He returned to the question of ending in a later session, and he said, you recently said on one occasion that at some point it will also be the last session. Of course, that was outrageous that I mentioned this, that it was a break-in of outer reality. We come to understand that throughout his life, in many situations, he has avoided binding commitments. You remember, he came into analysis where he said, I had not really lived until now. And he had avoided binding commitments in order to avoid the pain of separation, of saying farewell and mourning. This recognition was very bitter, but also provided the opportunity for some kind of fresh start in his 70s. Thank you very much. Maybe to be a little bit self-reflective, analyzing myself, I was very much in trouble with time, you remember. I had in mind, I had much more time than I had really, and I had to skip, and I was confused by this, by the reaction or by the recognition of reality. So I produced the topic I was speaking about in the scene with you. This was my first idea of this, but maybe... Okay.
Muchachos, ¿quieren preguntar algo? Puede ser en español y lo traducimos. ¿O en alemán? ¿Algo que quieran comentar, por favor?
I will do it in Spanish, okay?
In Spanish?
I will do it in Spanish.
Okay.
Okay? Ready?
Yes.
Bueno, primero agradecerle su presencia. La forma que el doctor trabaja o plantea la temporalidad, la atemporalidad, pasado, presente, futuro, tiene que ver con lo que hacemos todos todo el tiempo. Lo que está tratando de decir es que en el tratamiento psicoanalítico él puede tomar un momento de la sesión, ¿sí? Y darse cuenta cómo el paciente está intentando hacer duelos del pasado que pone en la situación analítica y que en 2 o 3 palabras Martin tiene la habilidad de hacer una metáfora de las angustias que el paciente tiene en la situación del análisis. Se le va a acabar el tiempo, se siente sobreviviente en una situación del 11 de septiembre, hay una cosa de derrumbe pero que vuelve a vivir. La hipótesis que está trayendo Martin acá es que a pesar de que el tiempo se condensa, en psicoanálisis trabajamos que un síntoma...
Gracias. En psicoanálisis tratamos de entender que hay un tiempo que condensa otros tiempos. Es otra forma de entender el tiempo. Y que en una resolución de una cosa sintomática sencilla, que parece sencilla, podemos sumar cosas del pasado que se están duplicando, triplicando en ese momento. Por eso el psicoanalista está interesado en conocer la historia del paciente. Como Martin sabía la historia de este paciente, un montonal de duelos que naturalmente cualquiera de nosotros tiene que enfrentar a los 70 si es que tenemos la suerte de vivir, ¿sí? Entonces Martin hace ahí un asemejo de el duelo de cada sesión, porque cada sesión tiene que empezar y terminar, ¿sí? Entonces parece muy simple, pero hay un comienzo, una terminación, y en ese ejercicio se puede retomar toda la vida, todos los ejercicios de la vida. Entonces ahí él retoma pasado, presente, futuro en este momento, ¿sí? Es un ejercicio muy interesante en relación con el manejo del tiempo en psicoanálisis, que es uno de los temas. Entonces, bueno, nada más estoy tratando de poner palabras en español de lo que él dijo para ver quién se atreve a preguntar, por ejemplo, si hay diferencias en el tratamiento de un paciente de 50 años o un paciente de 70 años. Ustedes son todavía estudiantes, pero espero que ahora que abran los ojos al campo clínico, descubran y descubramos todos que nos tenemos que volver especialistas en situaciones de la tercera y cuarta edad. La población de edad de 60, 70, 80 cada vez va a ser logarítmicamente presente. Do you follow me with this?
Yes, it was a very good summary.
Okay.
As far as I understand. Okay.
Is your Spanish okay? Okay.
No, I don't understand. No, I don't understand the other message.
One question.
Okay, ya, estamos por ahí.
Venga.
It's not so much of a question. I think I well, I made some kind of interpretation. I don't know if it's all right.
Please.
I thought of this golden coin like his new life. He talks that he didn't have a life before, that he didn't feel that he was living, and all this rubble was the struggle he had to submit himself to get to the point where he is now. But at the same time, he doesn't want to see that he is living. It's hard. It's a hard change going from fighting for your life to be comfortable with it. So I think that he's in a struggle, and he gets to see some part, and he refuses to see another. And that's why he's kind of living with this borrowed time, this remaining time, living in the future, because the present is something that I cannot completely grab, and the future it's better, or it's easier.
I think this is a very essential point of this treatment, which I wanted. I think you kept it. I agree, and I can add for you. Picked up this golden piece you will find in the rubbish. This is very determined, of course, and many things are in dreams. But the business I was talking about was a jewelry business, and he was a goldsmith. He had learned as a goldsmith, so this is and he has got this from his father. And this is so it's not only a piece of gold, but this piece of gold has a very special meaning in his very personal context. I did not, for confidential reasons, I did not mention this in the paper. And you picked up this point. And I have so much rubbish around it. These are only some nice pictures for making you interested. And we start an English-speaking master program, Master in Psychology, Clinical Psychology, psychoanalytic oriented, and with a psychoanalytic approach in October 2017, next year. And we will have, before this, a summer week, psychoanalytic, to study psychology in IPU for 1 week in the summertime in 2017. And afterwards I will speak with your president how we can make a cooperation possible. So if you're interested, have it in mind and come to Berlin. Thank you very much. I invite you.